Hey.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Nadeem. How are you?
Hello.
How's the audio? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you really well.
Okay, cool.
And y'all can hear me, right?
Yes.
Sweet.
You can. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for joining. I think we're just going to give some folks a minute or two to get going, to join in. How's everybody's Thursday going so far? Good?
Can't complain.
Awesome. This is our first one, so we're probably going to work out a couple kinks here, but that's fine.
Fair.
Hey, Matt, it says we are live.
Yeah, so we're now streaming live on my LinkedIn,
Okay.
but I think we're just going to wait for a few folks to join in, and then we can get started with like the Q&A and some of what we want to chat about. Let me see if I can also see from my LinkedIn. We have 30 or so people joining. I'm hoping a good chunk of those actually jump on.
All right.
And then we can.
And if you guys have any questions, please put them in chat.
Yeah, I think we have a private chat too as well, and for us internally, and then we have the public chat. Anyone can put comments and questions.
Good.
Awesome. So I guess we can get going. I think people will join in, and we might be a little bit behind as far as like timing, maybe a couple minutes behind. So what we're kind of chatting about now, I think some folks will join in. But anyway, thanks guys for joining. Awesome to have you both here. I think today what we really mostly want to chat about is what's going on at Cloud FinOps, and I'm personally really, really lucky to have you guys both here. First off, because you both are awesome to work with and really good people, but second off, because to find like true Cloud FinOps ninjas who are passionate about the space, who love talking about Cloud FinOps, love talking about their experience getting into FinOps from whatever they did before, is really awesome and exciting. So I want to turn over to you guys. I guess Nadeem, you'll go first because you're closest to me in the little boxes in my screen. But Nadeem and then Dieter, I guess introduce yourselves. Maybe if you can give us a little bit of a 2-minute background on like how you guys got into Cloud FinOps, were you guys in IT engineering originally, consulting, something else, and then you kind of got into this field because it's a little bit of a newer field for a lot of folks. So I think it'd be great to if you guys can give us a little bit of a background, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. My name is Nadeem Hussain. I work at Circle CI. I'm a cloud economist here. I originally came from the finance side. I used to work in equity research and portfolio management. And then I did a hard pivot into tech. And because it was just one of those things, I want a new problem space and something that's interesting. And tech was one of those things that really I was decently good at. So I did tech and got my master's in bioinformatics, and everything I did was in the cloud. If anybody knows me, they know I'm a really big GCP fanboy and a Google fanboy. So that was my first entrance into the public cloud space. Got my first job doing Terraform scripts and, Terraform and GCP and general architecture. And there was one specific client that was having, they wanted to know their finance side. So I decided to make some dashboards in GCP, and the rest is history. Went from there to another company that did Cloud FinOps, and then I'm currently at Circle CI. So anything's never linear, but the way that it happens is just you just kind of fall into it with me, especially.
That's awesome. It's really cool. Dieter, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have been doing Cloud FinOps since 2013 at companies like Google, Netflix, Roku, and Intuit. How I got into FinOps was when I left PayPal in 2013. I was thinking to myself, hey, Google at that time had 174 job postings. So I was like, hey, what's the worst case that can happen if I apply, right? They say no, and I'm no worse off than I'm now, right? So I applied at Google. They accepted me, right? And the interesting part for Google hiring process is that you actually apply into a queue, right? And for the most part, you are being randomly assigned to managers out of that hiring queue. So in my case, though, the manager was really interested in my background, where at PayPal, I was running the network operations center for 3.5 years, where I developed that broad knowledge of all the services and their interactions, right? And that manager needed someone with that background to be able to carve out inefficiencies in the internal Google services and assign those inefficiencies to the public cloud because building a new data center takes about 2 years, and the public cloud offering was growing so rapidly that they couldn't keep up.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you're at Roku now. I guess that's a good segue to one of the first subjects I wanted to ask you guys about. But how do you guys use your FinOps practice at Roku? How does it benefit not just your tech team and the budgeting and all the financial piece of it, but like how does it help Roku become a better company and further its mission?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. In a sense, we established a cloud center of excellence, right? And the team at Roku knew that they needed a FinOps specialist, right? And so they were looking for one, and through a friend that referred me, I got to interview with them, right? Really enjoyed the culture at Roku, and decided that, hey, this is a really good fit for me, right? Back then, our cloud usage was relatively low, and over the last 3 years, it has doubled twice. So that's maybe a good segue to go into how we are using Cloud FinOps, right? On one end, we are looking at KPIs and making sure that our cost per streaming hour doesn't grow over time, right? In the last 3 years, it has steadily increased. However, at some point last year, October, we decided, hey, we need to keep that KPI static and make sure that if there is a new workload, it has to be funded through existing workloads being optimized so that you have enough resources for that new workload, right? So that is one thing that we are doing. The other thing is, of course, training, ongoing training. We have tech talks on the AWS and the GCP side. On a monthly basis, we spend about an hour talking about a topic and doing a deep dive, and the engineers can attend that, and they learn about these new technologies in the cloud. And then, of course, certifications as well, right? Training and certifications. Getting an associate's certification or professional certification really helps to build that cloud knowledge.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting concept of using optimization to fund new projects. Is that a concept that you guys came up with through the FinOps team, or is that a business requirement that came down from like leadership or a CFO or something like that?
No, yeah, executive leadership basically said that this is out of control. We need to find some ways of curbing our cloud spend, and the way we implemented it is to use that cost per streaming hour KPI, right? And as a FinOps ambassador, I do a lot of outreach, and there's other companies that are establishing similar KPIs for their business use cases, so that they can track their spend over time. And really having that as a forcing function, right? That let's say you're somewhere at $2, right? And you say, hey, we cannot exceed that, right? It really helps the engineers to focus and adopt optimization or cost as another dimension that they need to optimize.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept too, because I mean, one of the dream results of creating a FinOps practice, even if you're a small company, seems like at least that one of the really big benefits is using those internal savings that you can get by better managing, whether it's rate optimization or usage optimization or a combination of both, using that cash flow that you free up to go grow the business and do other things, right? So it's really cool that you guys are tracking that KPI and looking at that and putting a lot of like business thought into like the technology optimization, which is really cool. Nadeem, how about yourself? How are you guys using your FinOps practice? How is it making you guys a better company?
Yeah, so I'd just like to parlay what you just said about, using those savings, to go forward. So at Circle CI, the cloud FinOps or cloud economics that we call inside, it's fairly new. So we did do a little bit before I was here. But when it came down to it, what we are doing is that we're reinvesting those savings back into the company. And that kind of comes down to where can we do low hanging fruits because we're so new in this area, much newer than probably Roku. We're trying to take those savings and maybe be able to do other things like products and R&D, try to decrease our cogs. So it's all about balancing, if in finance we talk about above the line and below the line, it's all about trying to find them, maximizing those two things because it's really important for us because we're still a smaller company. Relatively, we're still, if you want to call it we're VC funded. So we're really cognizant of our profit margins and our margins in general. So that's kind of the other side of, the cloud optimizations is trying to really play with our margins and really kind of focus on that. Now, Dieter talked about their streaming side. We look at our credit side. So we run off of a credit idea for workloads. And from a FinOps perspective, our team is really interested in the infrastructure that goes into it. How can we optimize it to either, make those credits better, or how can we make it in general, those credits look a little bit more appealing for the end user, be it X, Y, and Z. So that's something that we've been starting to work on is what is the cloud economics impact to a certain credit?
Do you guys feel, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, just came up in the back of my head, but do you guys feel like the evolution of technology and companies adopting FinOps practices, has that brought tech closer to the business and what's going on the business? Like, is it bringing you guys into conversations about what's actually going on financially with the company that you might not have been privy to earlier when it was just, hey, here's your budget, stay under the budget and buy what is going to do X, Y, Z kind of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, definitely being on that side, you're going to be able to see like, hey, this is what our forecast is for next year. This is where we want to be from a profit margin. How do we get there? Hey, is there anything that the cloud FinOps team can do? And then that's, hey, can we make up a couple basis points here and there? So yeah, within our situation, it gives us our team the ability to be very close to the finance team, to the point where we're having syncs almost every week to understand the implications of the technology that's moving forward. So very closely knit to the finance team, but also the technology team. A lot of the managers and some of the managers are now very cognizant of those costs too.
Yeah, it's amazing. Dieter, go ahead with, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that subject at all.
No, I mean, not just the engineers, but the leadership is more cost aware, right? And I can tell that there is always this tipping point, right? Where an organization builds in the cloud, right? And at some point, someone comes and says, hey, our cloud spend is increasing faster than revenue, right? And that's where the tipping point happens. And then, it might take 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, right? But leadership at some point will then say, hey, we need to do something rather drastic, right? Maybe we need to establish that cloud center of excellence. Maybe we need to hire that FinOps specialist, right? And, I think it goes both ways. FinOps can only be successful when there is a top-down sort of mandate, but also bottom-up training, right? If the engineers don't know how to save money, then they simply don't have the tools to do so, right? They cannot perform. So you need to also train the engineers and tell them, hey, you know what? For S3, there is cheaper options, right? For CPUs, for virtual machines, you don't have to do Intel all the way. there's AMD, and there's ARM-based microprocessor architectures, right, that have almost identical performance or very similar performance and cheaper pricing points.
Yeah, it's I saw this really interesting article the other day that was talking about that exact subject, and it was talking about how essentially now every engineering decision is a purchasing decision, right? In the world that we live in, and cloud first and cloud only type of companies, every time you turn a knob somewhere, you're getting charged for that action, right? Even if it's a small amount of charge, right? So kind of brings my next question, which was like, it feels like we're at this ramp of like 1.0 cloud FinOps, and everything always evolves and changes over time, right? Like, where do you guys see FinOps as a practice growing and changing over the next handful of years?
I think it's going to be completely integrated into the fiber of development. I'm starting to see a lot of architecture positions out there with friends who are looking at jobs. They're looking at costs. Even my friends who are DBAs who are looking at jobs, they have to fundamentally look at costs. We're in a world, especially with the macroeconomic backdrop, that we're trying to look for optimizations. And one of the biggest optimization a company can do is, the cloud. What we're seeing is in areas you can only cut so many people, right? You can only decrease your headcount so many. So what are other potential optimizations that we can do? And if you look into the cloud, it could be as simple as, hey, maybe we need to revisit our tagging strategy and get more visibility into the teams and see what that looks like, and then maybe break down into the team's point, Dieter's point. Maybe look at AMD, maybe look at ARM, or maybe ask those questions. And I think this is where FinOps is going to come into, is really have a seat at the table and be able to push those questions like, hey, why aren't we looking at serverless? Oh, hey, why aren't we looking at ARM? What about our technology can't work on ARMs? Why are we looking at AMD? It just costs 10% less for the most part. Why? I think you're going to see this evolution of FinOps to have the team members at a seat at the table rather than be an ancillary thought. And that's what I'm really, happy about.
That's amazing. Yeah, go ahead, Dieter, if you have any thoughts there.
Nadim said something really interesting, that FinOps will become more integrated, right? It is similar to, why do we have police, right? If everyone does the right thing, we don't need police force, right? There will be no crime whatsoever. And here's the same thing, right? If the engineers, and I think fundamentally the problem is that the universities don't prepare the engineers for the jobs properly, right? At least for me, yes, I know calculus, I can solve differential equations, I know multidimensional bodies, but none of this I need in my, well, I mean, maybe tensors, now with AI are a little bit more important or relevant, but none of this I need in my job, right? And I feel that the universities don't really prepare the engineers, right? And I feel we need to start having FinOps at the universities as well, right? As a course that is being taught. Ultimately, I think my observation is a little bit higher level to what Nadim said, that Andy Jassy said, I think in 2019, right, that only 5% of all IT is in the cloud at the moment, right? So we have this body of 95% that I think over time will move into the cloud, because the cloud has multiple advantages, elasticity being one of them, maybe a global presence, right, if it's needed, is another one of them, right? And the engineers can just innovate much more quickly in the cloud, right? And I think more and more organizations will want to take advantage of that. So we will have this influx of these new people, right, that look at things like trusted advisor, right, and look at it as, hey, this is really great, right? While the people that have been doing FinOps for like 8-10 years, right, want to shoot trusted advisor, right? Because it is misleading, it is not a good source of the truth, right? The numbers don't necessarily reflect your enterprise discounts and rate card discounts, those kind of things, right? And so sort of like, in sports car racing, is at the forefront of automobile technology, right? Whatever they find, ABS or whatever technologies are being developed for sports car, not saying that sports car racing is a very useful discipline, right? But it does help to drive that technology evolution. And the people that have been doing FinOps for like 8-10 years, they are trying to solve very different problems, right? From the people that just started FinOps 1, 2, 3 years ago. And so I still see that there will be this mix of FinOps expertise within the community, right? And that the long-term FinOps people are going to drive the technologies or influence the technologies, and we will see more automation, right? For example, at Intuit, I built a waste dashboard, right, where the waste numbers are displayed as dollars with the highest dollar number on top. Well, that's great for visibility, but it doesn't do anything. Now, let's say if you have 15,000 EBS volumes that are orphaned, I can't ask an engineer to go and clean this up, right? Because one EBS volume may save us 20 cents or 50 cents or something like that, right? And the engineer can arguably say, hey, in that hour that I'm working, I already cost the company, $100 or $200. I simply, it's not justified my activity for the savings that we are getting. So we will see more and more automation surface.
Yeah. Question on you guys, especially you, Dieter, been in the FinOps space for a while now. So for younger companies, for companies that are just starting out, thinking about optimization, what is the easy buttons they should be pressing early on, right? If you have a company, like we talk to companies all the time that they don't have a separate FinOps team or a FinOps engineer or the consultant that they're working with, they really look at this being a subset of the responsibilities of the DevOps group, or of maybe it's a CTO and one developer, and they're just kind of like working on the stack themselves, right? So is there like how much FinOps is too much for younger, smaller teams, and also teams that are just starting to think about cloud optimization? Like what should they be doing first?
To get started, there's actually a question in chat, right? How do smaller companies get started with FinOps? And I think have a person dedicated to it, right? It can be full-time or part-time. That's a start, right? And part-time could be 4 or 5 hours a week, right? Reach out to your account manager, right? For the most part, they have connections within the cloud provider side, right? And they can potentially produce some reports that show you orphaned EBS or underutilized virtual machines, that kind of stuff, right? And that's a good starting point, right? Then there is companies like Target, where Kim Weir has a team of 25 people, right? But these 25 people are not FinOps people. They are, data engineers, full stack software engineers, right? Data scientists that support the FinOps function. So it tells me that Target must be it's siloed in business units, right? And you cannot borrow engineers for like 3, 6, 9 months across business units. You need to hire and fund your own development, right? At Roku, I just opened a Jira ticket. Now it may take 2-4 weeks for it to be assigned to a sprint, right? Our sprints are 2 weeks, and then some engineer will volunteer and build this thing. So I don't need a large team. More often, I think a small scrappy team that is maybe mission-based and cross-functional is more successful, right? Because you will need that data engineer, you will need that systems engineer, right? But do you need them 40 hours a week? Maybe not, right? Maybe 5, 10, 20 hours a week is sufficient.
Matt looks like he's paused, so I'll take a little bit from the smaller company. When we look at a smaller company that doesn't really have the resources, again, Dieter hit the nail on the head. We don't need, 100% FTE, maybe like even 20% FTE or 30% FTE it's very easy. And I love the point that you said about trusted advisor. Yeah, trusted advisor isn't good, but for these small companies, that's going to be their bread and butter, and that's what you have. And you can get a lot of information from just using something like Trusted Advisor. And I think the low-hanging fruits, I think before we talk about that, I think we need to start with a quote, which is author Stephen Covey said in his book, 7 Habits of the Highly Effective Human, to begin with the end in mind. What is our end goal? Right? Often in FinOps, we kind of sit around and we say like, oh, we want to have 100% optimization. We want to have 100% tagging and coverage and whatnot. In reality, like those are really good aspirations, but as a small company, let's look at the very small, low-hanging fruit, which is let's make sure we're not bleeding. I think that's the biggest thing is triage. One of my mentors talked about triage your environment first. After we triage an environment, then it comes down to, okay, how are we looking at our spend from a savings plans or an RI perspective? Are we bleeding out over there? Have we gone into contracts that are maybe too much for us? Are we over covered? And then that's when you can start talking about, hey, let's start looking at our ability to work with other team members. So in our company, being able to talk to the CTO, being able to talk and partner with data reliability, the SRE team, infrastructure, I think those are really important things to do at the very beginning. If we can have that buy-in from the top and also from an SRE perspective and the architects, I think we can create a really good mesh of skill sets that can transpire over everything. And I think one of the big things that we need to do from a small team perspective is what is our tag strategy? Tagging is really important because it gives us really good information, but at the same point in time, it really kind of allows us to be methodical with how we're doing something. So I think those are kind of the big name things to do for a small company, but I think the most important is to create those network inside and create that transparency, but also go for those low-hanging fruits. Like you don't need a cloud health, a Apptio, cloud ability immediately. Maybe establish your processes in the very beginning, go through some of the pain, and then you reward yourself with one of those big providers.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, agreed.
Amazing stuff. I only have you guys for a couple more minutes, and I wanted to I scooted a little bit closer to my router because my video was getting a little choppy. But my last question to you guys would be: there's so much noise in the industry right now about LLMs and AI and generative this and generative that. Are you guys utilizing any of those tools in your FinOps stack? Is there anything in the roadmap where you're like, hey, we want to build a FinOps LLM for this use case or so on and so forth? A little bit of this question might be self-serving because we're in product development, obviously, for all sorts of stuff. So I'm always curious to pick, a customer's brain on like what's on their roadmap and what might be important given, the big AI boom and the big LLM trend right now.
I'm personally very cautious of AI and FinOps. And the reason why I'm saying that is the cloud economies and FinOps world, it is necessary to have a human hand in it. And the reason why is because what happens if there is a prod account and the AI says, hey, we should just turn everything off here because this is costing too much money. Yes, you can say to the AI, do not touch the prod account. But the reality is AIs are AIs. So I'm very cautious. Now, on the flip side, are we trying to use machine learning? Are we trying to use with something to crunch our numbers? 100%. I think if you haven't done it already, or at least thinking about it, then you're behind. So like being able to forecast your demand in the next month or the quarter, and give that and that partnership with finance to be able to see like, hey, maybe our AI, maybe using this machine learning idea to enhance their forecast might be better. Using something like that will help, but to unleash, for lack of better words, AI on an environment to do cost optimizations, I'm not 100% on board. Buying RIs, buying SPs, like that, I'm totally okay with that. That makes sense, especially during peak hours, peak times in your environment. But I don't necessarily want it to be an overarching theme when it comes to FinOps. I'm very cautious of it now. Dieter?
Yeah, so we are definitely exploring AI for forecasting, right? We have currently a forecasting algorithm that has an average forecast variance of 2%. And we just want to use an AI model and see how it compares to that forecasting algorithm, right? So that is definitely a project that is out on the roadmap. Honestly, I don't expect it to be better, but let's see, right? There are some tools that are being developed by startups at the moment where you can use the large language model for troubleshooting. For example, if you say like, hey, what is connected to this database? Which query is the most resource intensive? Um, what application is having the most connections, right? For that, I can see that the AI will be able to do better rather than having to use command line, right, on a console. However, engineers are used to the command line on the console. So having to type, like making Google searches for your problems, I don't know if that will be a jump, right? Maybe if you can talk to it, but the voice recognition has to be amazing, right? Because we have people with different backgrounds, from different cultures, with different pronunciations, right? Tomato and tomato, and it would have to be able to recognize that to be useful, right? But that is a different problem and it's not AI related, right? So I don't know how the adoption of those tools will be. Now, that said, when I use Copilot, right, I can actually highlight a section of code and I can ask Copilot, hey, can you improve this, right? And it will know things that I wasn't aware of, right? Let's say you have a loop where you fill an array from the loop, right? And it will flatten that out to a split function that assigns the thing directly to an array, right? Using a lower level function that doesn't have to loop in the runtime. So I see it being able to immediately assist with those kind of tasks, right? But in the FinOps space, maybe troubleshooting like, hey, why is this database so expensive, right? In the sense like a network architecture, right? That it can ingest that information and then provide more input based on those outcomes, right? That you can ask it, hey, how would you optimize this database? Well, you do here a select count star, which is very, because there's a couple billion rows in this table, it's very cost intensive, right? So if you were to just ask for the primary key, and that would be maybe a good enough approximation, right? So I can see it performing those kind of things sort of like as a helping agent, but not necessarily as a replacement. Now, doctors and lawyers, can they be replaced by large language models? Probably. Maybe not at the current technology level, right? But then all these companies are working on large language models that can take 1 million tokens or 10 million tokens as an input. So you have an entire book series or an entire, law from a state, right? That can be an input to your question, and then you ask something like, "Hey, what does the trespass law in Kansas look like?" Right? And the AI can provide a reasonable good feedback on that, right? So yes, lawyers, doctors, and those kind of jobs maybe, but FinOps it's more of a dynamic profession. I don't see AI really fully taking over there. I think Mac is freezing again.
Yeah, I'll just echo
Yes.
what you said. The ability for to chat with your environment would be very interesting. Just to
Mhm.
say, especially from a developer perspective, like, hey, this product account or this dev account, why is it so expensive? And for it to just basically say, oh, you have all these unused EC2 instances, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I can see it to be sort of like a trusted advisor that is a little bit more useful, right? So yeah.
Definitely. Matt, are you here? Okay. Well, Dieter.
Maybe we call it a day here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dieter. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And
Absolutely.
team, everybody who's out there, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, comments, please by all means ask one of us, message one of us offline, and we'd be grateful to help. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. You guys take care. Bye. It was nice talking to you, Nadim.